In the sweltering summer of 1939, as Europe teetered on the brink of catastrophe, Hermann Goering stood before his Luftwaffe commanders in Berlin's Hall estate. His voice boomed with unshakable arrogance. "No enemy bomber can reach the Ruhr. If one reaches the Ruhr, my name is not Goering. You can call me Meyer." The room erupted in laughter, the kind that masks unease. Meyer, after all, was as common a name in Germany as Schmidt or Müller, synonymous with the ordinary, the forgettable. Goering, the Reichsmarschall, the Iron Knight of the skies, could never be ordinary. He envisioned a Luftwaffe that would blanket the fatherland in impenetrable steel wings, rendering the heart of German industry, the coal mines and steelworks of Essen and Duisburg, untouchable. But history has a way of turning boasts into bitter ironies. By 1940, as British Blenheims and Wellingtons pierced the night over Wilhelmshaven, the first cracks appeared in that facade. Goering dismissed them as flukes, isolated pinpricks from an enemy too weak to sustain the fight. Yet the Allied bombers kept coming, their engines a distant thunder that grew into a roar. On the night of May 30th, 1942, over Cologne's ancient spires, the Royal Air Force unleashed Operation Millennium, the first 1,000-bomber raid. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, the unyielding architect of Bomber Command, had scraped together every available aircraft, from training squadrons to coastal patrols. The pilots, many barely out of their teens, navigated by the Rhine's silver ribbon under a full moon. Below, in the cramped air raid shelters of Cologne's working-class districts, families huddled as sirens wailed like wounded beasts. The ground trembled as 1,455 tons of high explosives and incendiaries rained down, igniting the medieval timber-framed houses along the Hohe Strasse. Flames leapt from rooftop to rooftop, merging into a vortex that sucked oxygen from the streets. Civilians emerged the next morning to a landscape of charred rubble, the Dom Cathedral's twin towers standing defiant amid the devastation. Goering raged in private, blaming his radar operators and night fighters, but the truth gnawed at him. The British had penetrated 400 miles into Reich territory, striking a city thought safe behind layers of flak batteries and searchlights. The German generals, ensconced in their map rooms at the Oberkommando der Luftwaffe in Wildpark-Wehrde, began to whisper doubts. Adolf Galland, the dashing inspector of fighters with his trademark mustache and 94 victories, argued furiously with Goering. "We need fighters, not bombers," he insisted during a heated meeting in November 1942. "The enemy is coming in daylight soon, and our Messerschmitts are stretched thin." Galland's mind raced back to the Battle of Britain, where he'd seen the cost of divided resources, fighters tethered to bombers, vulnerable to Spitfires. Now, as American B-17 Flying Fortresses joined the fray from bases in East Anglia, the Luftwaffe's pilots felt the psychological toll. They launched from airfields like Jever or Wittmundhofen, engines straining against the weight of extra fuel tanks, only to engage in desperate dogfights high over the North Sea. Exhaustion set in, eyes blurred from scanning the endless blue for the glint of aluminum wings. "Every raid chips away at our spirit," one Focke-Wulf pilot confided in his diary after downing a straggling B-24 but losing 3 comrades to P-47 Thunderbolts. The fear wasn't just death, it was the inevitability, the knowledge that replacements were green boys with mere hours in the cockpit. By July 1943, the storm broke over Hamburg. Operation Gomorrah began on the 24th, with 791 RAF Lancasters and Halifaxes saturating the dockyards and U-boat pens along the Elbe River. The humid air trapped heat, and phosphorus sticks ignited a firestorm that roared like a living entity. Winds howled at 150 miles per hour, uprooting trees and hurling debris through the Altona district. Asphalt bubbled on the streets, trapping fleeing residents in molten tar. In the cellars of the Hammerbrook neighborhood, thousands suffocated as oxygen vanished, their lungs burning with superheated air. Albert Speer, the armaments minister, toured the ruins days later, his polished boots crunching over glass and ash. 6 more Hamburgs and Germany will be finished, he warned Hitler in a memo dated August 1, 1943. Speer's mind churned with calculations. The bombings had halted 700,000 tons of steel production, forcing him to disperse factories into rural barns and underground caverns like the Mittelwerk in the Harz Mountains. Workers toiled in dim light, fingers numb from cold, haunted by the distant rumble that signaled another raid. Yet Speer marveled at the resilience, the way machinists salvaged lathes from the wreckage, driven by a mix of fear and fanaticism. The bombing spurred us, he later reflected, but they planted seeds of doubt. How could the Führer protect us if the skies belonged to the enemy? The surprise deepened as the Americans pressed their daylight precision doctrine. On August 17, 1943, the 8th Air Force targeted the ball bearing plants at Schweinfurt and the Messerschmitt factories at Regensburg. Over 376 B-17s thundered across the Dutch border, their gunners swiveling 50 caliber turrets against swarms of Bf-109s from Jagdgeschwader 26, the Abbeville boys. Flak shells burst like black flowers, shredding wings and sending bombers spiraling in flames over the Bavarian countryside. 60 aircraft failed to return, a bloodbath that shook USAAF commanders. But the Germans paid dearly too. Luftwaffe ace Hubertus von Bohnen lost his life that day, his FW-190 exploding midair. Goering, pacing his opulent office in the Air Ministry on Wilhelmstrasse, fumed at the reports. "The Americans are forging ahead," he admitted to Galland, his face flushed. The depth of penetration stunned him. Schweinfurt lay 300 miles inland, far beyond what pre-war planners had anticipated. Nightmares plagued the Reichsmarschall, visions of endless bomber streams, unopposed, pulverizing the synthetic oil refineries at Lona and Politz. Winter brought no respite. From November 1943 to March 1944, the Battle of Berlin raged. Harris hurled 9,111 sorties at the capital, aiming to break morale as he had in Hamburg. On November 18, 1943, 440 Lancasters struck the Siemens factories in Spandau, but fierce winds scattered the bombs across residential areas. In the bunkers beneath the Tiergarten, civilians clutched each other as the earth shook, the acrid smell of cordite seeping through vents. Children whimpered, their small bodies rigid with terror, while parents murmured prayers, minds flashing to lost sons on the Eastern Front. Is this the end? A woman in Kreuzberg wondered, her thoughts a whirlwind of resentment toward the regime that had promised invincibility. Goering, sheltered in his Carenhall bunker 50 miles north, felt the psychological fracture. "The jig is up," he confided to aides after seeing P-51 Mustangs escorting B-17s over Berlin on March 6, 1944. Those long-range fighters, dropping from the sun like hawks, shredded his interceptors. Jagdgeschwader 1, based at Dielen in Holland, lost 13 pilots in one clash, their radios crackling with desperate calls. "Indiana, Indiana," code for enemy fighters. Big Week from February 20th to 25th, 1944, marked the turning point. Over 3,800 USAAF sorties hammered aircraft plants at Leipzig, Gotha, and Brunswick. The 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustangs, provided cover, downing 81 Luftwaffe planes for the loss of 28. Galland watched his force bleed out, pilots like Walter Krupinski with 197 kills, barely escaping with singed uniforms. "We're fighting a losing battle," Galland told Goering in a stormy confrontation at Berchtesgaden on February 28, 1944. "Prioritize fighters over everything." But Goering, loyal to Hitler's whims, diverted resources to wonder weapons like the V-2 rockets, ignoring the human cost. Pilots flew on Benzedrine, their nerves frayed, dreaming of the quiet farms they'd left behind. As 1944 bled into 1945, the bombings reached apocalyptic depths. On February 13, 1945, 773 RAF bombers incinerated Dresden's Baroque heart, the Frauenkirche crumbling in an inferno that killed up to 25,000. Phosphorus clung to skin like liquid fire, and refugees from the east fleeing the Red Army perished in the Altmarkt square. Speer, inspecting the aftermath, saw the strategic toll, rail yards destroyed, delaying reinforcements to the Oder front. The war is lost, he wrote in his diary on February 15th, his mind heavy with the futility. The general's overconfidence had crumbled under the weight of Allied persistence. Goering, once the boastful protector, became a shadow, retreating to morphine haze as sirens, now mockingly called Meyer's trumpets, wailed nightly. In the end, the strategic bombing that German leaders never anticipated reshaped their world. It forced 8 million civilians into evacuation, crippled oil production by 90% by May 1945, and left pilots like those of Jagdgeschwader 52 grounded for lack of fuel. The human psyche bent but didn't break entirely, resilience born of desperation. Yet, in the ruins of cities like Nuremberg and Munich, the unspoken question lingered. How had the invincible Reich come to this? The answer echoed in the drone of distant engines, a reminder that hubris invites the whirlwind.